check out our streaming schedule for this week. We've got tons of content in terms of the NFL and college football, as we're going live just about every single day this week. So make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single moment where we go live. And now, on with our feature presentation.
There are many things that you probably think of when you think of Jimmy Carter. You think of the fact that he was the oldest president of all time, living to be 100 by the time of his death on Sunday, December 29, 2024. You think of his humanitarian work and his kindness and generosity, with many calling him the nicest man to ever serve in the Oval Office. You probably think of a lot of other things with Carter, as even if his presidency might not have been the most successful or anywhere close to it in the eyes of many, his legacy is one that will live on in American history. However, when you think of Jimmy Carter and the impact that he had on the sports world, odds are the first thing that comes to mind is what transpired at the 1980 Summer Olympics in Moscow. This was arguably the most controversial decision that the 39th President of the United States made during his 4 years in office, and was a move that was highly unpopular and still remains controversial all these years later. In short, during the height of the Cold War, and with tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union at an all-time high, Carter decided that the United States Olympic Committee would not be sending any representatives to an Olympic Games hosted in Russia, and no athletes would be competing there. There are plenty of times where sports and international politics go hand in hand, and where these seemingly two separate worlds find a way to collide with one another. And there was no better example of that during Carter's presidency than those 1980 Olympics and the decision to boycott, encouraging other nations to boycott the games in communist Russia as well. In all likelihood, you know that story. But what if I said that there was another story involving Jimmy Carter, an international conflict, and a sporting event? Because 2 years before the Olympic boycott, in 1978, Jimmy Carter actually played an instrumental part in shaping one particular broadcast of Monday Night Football. Like I've said many times in the past, Monday Night Football back in the 1970s was a cultural phenomenon that took the country by storm. And it wasn't entirely uncommon for presidents to be caught up in football fever and shape the broadcast in one way or another. You can learn more about one such instance by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And we've got another one for you today in the wake of Carter's passing. Because nearly half a century later, this is the story behind Jimmy Carter and the bizarre yet noteworthy impact that he had on Monday Night Football. Before I talk about the actual incident in question and what exactly transpired that had the 39th President of the United States interfering with a football game in some capacity, we need some context to understand what was supposed to be happening on that day in the first place, both with the game and with the world. Starting with the game, it's September 18th, 1978. It's week 3 of the NFL season, and we find ourselves under the lights in Foxborough for this AFC East battle between the Baltimore Colts and the New England Patriots. Colts-Patriots was a massive rivalry, heightened even more so after the 1977 season when the teams met during the final week of the season, and a horrible fumble call that went Baltimore's way enabled them to win the game, giving the Colts the AFC East title. Unfortunately, the game that you're watching didn't seem to have as high stakes by week 3 of the 1978 season, because the Colts were off to an abysmal start. 2 games into the season, and the Colts had yet to score a point, losing 38-0 against the Dallas Cowboys in a game that you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, and losing 42-0 to the Miami Dolphins. When you're outscored 80-0 over your first 2 games, that's not good. That's about as bad as you can get. Still, the Colts were on a Monday night telecast for the second time in the first 3 weeks, and maybe they could right the ship and get back on track with a win against their division rival. And the good news for the Colts was that they were able to get back on track, salvage their season to avoid the dreaded 0-3 start, and win the game. Because in a surprising upset win, the Colts went on the road to Foxborough, and in the biggest upset in Monday Night Football history at the time, and maybe the biggest one to this day, excluding the Washington-Dallas replacement game in 1987, the Colts, as 17.5-point underdogs, won it 34-27. When I say that no one saw this coming, I genuinely mean it, that no one saw this coming. And it was thanks in part to a masterful performance by running back Joe Washington, who had 53 yards rushing, 41 yards receiving with a touchdown, and 54 yards passing with a touchdown, along with a kickoff return for a touchdown with 90 seconds left in the fourth quarter, and the score tied at 27. Washington truly did it all on this day, scoring 3 different touchdowns in 3 different ways. And many call it one of the finest performances by any player in a game in Monday Night Football history. Combine that with the Colts defense that forced 4 turnovers and forced the usually good Patriots quarterback Steve Grogan to go just 11 for 33, completing 33% of his passes while throwing 3 interceptions and posting a passer rating of 31, which is worse if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. And the Colts were back in business. Despite having virtually no one at quarterback entering the game, seeing as Bill Troop doesn't exactly move the needle like Burt Jones does, the Colts found a way to get it done. However, despite that crazy and shocking upset, there was something a little more noteworthy that was taking place right around this time. There was something that caught the attention of people around the world and around the country just a little bit more than this game right here, as in a battle between the 1-1 Patriots and the 0-2 Colts. And that was peace in the Middle East. Because throughout all of September, thanks to the hard work of Jimmy Carter, in what many considered to be his finest hour as president, a peace treaty was being hashed out between Israel and Egypt. I'm not going to dive too much into the weeds of the actual conflict and the treaty itself, simply because there are many history channels out there and many resources out there that already cover this way better than I could. But Jimmy Carter had the leaders of Egypt and Israel meet up in Camp David, Maryland, and had them hash out an agreement for peace over the course of a 2-week stretch. The agreement, known as the Camp David Accords, outlined a ton of things, from what to do about the troops, to what to do about land, to how everything should be governed, to everything in between, the whole 9 yards. It was an awfully tense negotiation, especially seeing as the two nations weren't exactly on the greatest of terms. But Carter was adamant that a peace deal get done, and he did everything in his power to make it so. And thanks to him, a years-long problem was hashed out and resolved in a matter of 2 weeks. And it seemed like the framework for the deal was just about done on September 17th, 1978, which was a Sunday. All that was left to do was for Jimmy Carter to meet with the press at a joint session of Congress, which is what you're watching right now, and announce to the world that there was peace between Israel and Egypt. It was an easy PR win for him, seeing as it seemed as though he solved the problem plaguing the Middle East throughout the 1970s, and seeing as this was the defining moment of his presidency up until this point. Heck, even one Republican said on what Carter was able to pull off. From a political standpoint, Jimmy Carter's victory can be compared to John Kennedy's in the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962. In other words, it's a really big deal, and both parties agreed on that. And with that, Carter was going to announce live on television on Monday, September 18th, that the Camp David Accords were signed. And the set time for the speech? The set time for this speech right here? 9 o'clock Eastern. Yeah, you might be able to see a problem with that, and you might be able to see where Jimmy Carter going live at 9 could be a bit of an issue. Because, you see, Monday Night Football started at 9 o'clock Eastern. And this meant that ABC was going to be in a bit of a pickle, as was Jimmy Carter himself. If you started at 9 o'clock, you had 3 options, and neither of them were all that good. Option 1, ABC has to show the speech at 9 o'clock, and the game starts at 9 o'clock, meaning that people would miss the start of the game and would join the game in progress. That would make a ton of people upset, especially because the previous week, all of the 1 o'clock games were joined in progress because the network showed the Pope's visit to the United States, and that ran long, cutting into the entire first half of the early slate of games. You don't want to have to do that again, not 2 weeks in a row. Option 2, ABC has to show the speech at 9 o'clock, and the game starts right after that, meaning that a lot of fans would be upset that they couldn't stay up to watch the whole thing, and meaning that fans at the game could get even rowdier, seeing as a later start time means more alcohol sales. Option 3, ABC doesn't show the speech at all, in which case, that's not good for Carter, because that's one of the big three networks not showing Carter's biggest PR win and defining moment. So much like we had a conflict between Egypt and Israel, we had a conflict on our hands between Jimmy Carter and what felt like America, because as things stood, Egypt and Israel's peace treaty was going to get in the way of football. And that's when Thomas P. O'Neill Jr., the Speaker of the House, spoke with Carter about this and persuaded him to change his speech. As O'Neill said after the Camp David Accords were signed, Carter told me to get ready for a 9 o'clock joint session tomorrow night. I said, Mr. President, 9 o'clock? That's when the football game is on. My friend and the owner of the Patriots, Billy Sullivan, has his team on. How about 8 o'clock? Keep in mind that this is relevant because not only were the Patriots playing, but because Sullivan's daughter was a member of the Democratic Party, the same party Carter was in, and was trying to represent Massachusetts in the United States Senate that year. Maybe if this was some other team, this never would have come up. But because it was the Patriots and the owner's daughter was a politician, the issue was brought to Carter's attention. And upon hearing that, Carter decided that, yep, the football game was a pretty big deal and was worth moving the announcement. Peace in the Middle East is big and all that, but we've got to make sure everyone can watch the Colts play the Patriots uninterrupted and in its entirety. So Carter responded to O'Neill's request by saying, fine, 8 o'clock. And with that, when the joint session was held, it wasn't at 9 o'clock like originally scheduled. Instead, it was at 8 o'clock, with a session being over a few minutes before Howard Coast Selling Company were about to go on the air on ABC to show the action in the AFC East. And if you think that this is some sort of bizarre joke, this was actually somewhat of a controversy too regarding what time the session would be done and aired, with Paul Klein, the executive vice president for programming on NBC, saying that he knew that this decision was done purely for television purposes, indirectly hinting at the fact that Monday Night Football, being the cultural phenomenon that it was, and especially coming off of a week where games were missed for the Pope's visit, could not be messed with. Said Klein, this is the age of media. You do what you have to do. You try to settle wars, you want to attract attention. I don't see why people should try to find anything negative about that. And this was definitely one way to attract attention. Sell peace in the Middle East at 8 o'clock, and then gather around to watch the football game right afterwards. That is quite the lead-out program, if I do say so myself. And when it comes to the game between these two teams behind me right here, like I said before, there have been plenty of times throughout the history of the NFL and Monday Night Football that the presidents end up playing a part in the broadcast. We saw what happened in 2008 when Democratic candidate Barack Obama and Republican candidate John McCain ended up interviewing live at halftime of a Monday Night Football game right before the election. We saw what happened in 1984 when Monday Night Football got impacted due to a presidential debate between Ronald Reagan and Walter Mondale. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And of course, we saw that here when the announcement of the joint session for Congress for the Camp David Accords was moved because of a football game where one team was a 17.5-point favorite against a winless team. When you put it like that, it's kind of hard to believe. But Monday Night Football truly was a cultural phenomenon, and this display absolutely showed it. It's funny looking back on it nearly half a century later, how Jimmy Carter solving peace between Egypt and Israel for the time being almost led to an entirely different controversy, with this one involving a sporting event. It's funny looking back on it how arguably the greatest upset in Monday Night Football history was this close to being preempted and not being seen in its entirety, with one problem being swapped out for another. But when you have someone in your ear telling you to change the start time of the announcement of peace in the Middle East because of a football game, or someone who just really likes football and didn't want to miss the game, I think that says a lot about America and its priorities, for better or for worse. Because that's what happened in 1978. Because peace in the Middle East and a crazy good football game that produced an upset for the ages, that is peaches and cream.
Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and check out my other channels, JG8 for the history of college football, JG7 for the history of baseball, and JG9 News, where we talk about all things happening in the NFL. Join me every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play live NFL trivia for cash prizes. And make sure to join me live, as we're on stream just about every single day. And thanks to all our Patreon members and our YouTube members for helping out the channel. See how you become a member and show your support financially in the description down below.